Hello again, it's George Yates with Justice for All, and we're going to be here for the next hour here on 1650 WHKT AM. We're live here and on this Memorial Day weekend, and boy, it's a lovely day outside. I'm sure a lot of you are driving along and headed somewhere for maybe a 3-day weekend, and so I hope you have a great time. Be safe out there. And of course, it is the Memorial Day weekend, so it's a time to honor our veterans. And here we are living in Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is probably one of the largest concentrations of military people in the world. And so a lot of you are retired or active duty military and or have fathers or mothers or sisters or brothers who are serving in the military, sons and daughters. So all of the veterans out there, congratulations to you, and we honor your service. Today we are going to have a veteran, a military veteran here with us. Her name is Sarah Blum. She is a decorated nurse from the Vietnam War era and is now living in Auburn, Washington, Seattle, Washington. And our topic today is going to be on the ongoing real scandal, I guess if you would call it, sexual abuse in the military. Sarah Blum has written a book on it, has interviewed more than 60 women who were the victims of sexual abuse. And, of course, it's a very timely subject. As anybody out there has been keeping track of the news knows that just in this morning's paper, Chuck Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, addressed the graduating class of the United States Naval Academy. And one of the topics of his commencement address was the sexual abuse problem that's in the military today, and he admonished or encouraged the young new officers in the Navy to be leaders and to be role models and to make sure that those who are victims of sexual abuse and also mental health trauma, that they are going to be in charge of that going forward. So Sarah is an expert on these things. She has interviewed many people regarding the sexual assault, and also she is a bit of an expert in PTSD, which, of course, many sexual assault victims are also victimized by PTSD. She is a psychotherapist and has worked with many of these wounded warriors to nurse them back to mental health. So she's going to be our guest today. She's going to be on the phone with us live from Seattle, Washington. I wanted to briefly talk about something that we had a guest 2 weeks back, Billy Bright, our local attorney, who had to take his battle for rights to his daughter that he had conceived by a sperm donor. He took it all the way to the Virginia Supreme Court. He was our guest 2 weeks ago. And, of course, during that show, we talked about Jason Patrick. It was a national story in his fight to have parental rights or get parental rights to his son, Gus, which was all over the news. And turned out that several days after our show aired, Jason Patrick won his case in the California Appeals Court. And because he had established some parental rights or a parental relationship with his son, even though California law had said that unless you have a contract, you cannot have parental rights if you are a sperm donor. So justice is coming for people out there sometimes, even though the law says otherwise. So hopefully that's the kind of thing that we talk about on our show here. The name of our show is Justice for All, and I'm George Yates. I'm your host. We're here on 1650 AM. Today we are going to have Sarah Blum with us. She is on the phone with us now. Are you there, Sarah?
I am here.
Well, that's great. I'm really excited to have you here today. I read your book, Women Under Fire. Sarah is the author of Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. She began to interview a lot of people in hopes of writing a book at some point, and during the course of her interviews, she came to a realization. What was that, Sarah?
I just want to also let people know that I actually pronounce my last name Blum. It's like plum with a B.
Oh, okay.
Go
ahead.
While I was interviewing, I actually interviewed probably about 60 women veterans from World War II all the way up to and including Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I began, I really did not know about the culture of abuse toward women in the military. I discovered that as I went along. But what happened was I started to get some of these horrendous stories of sexual assault, rape, and retaliation. And I was shocked and stunned and appalled, and I kept going. And then ultimately, because I wasn't writing about that, ultimately in 2009, I'd been writing for 3 years and interviewing women for 3 years. And then I turned over what I had to an editor who gave me a tremendous amount of feedback, very detailed, specific feedback. It was really excellent. It was a bit overwhelming to me because I'd never written before. And then the key thing that was in his feedback was that I needed to take a look at the stories that I had that were of abuse, of assault, and focus in and narrow my focus to that. And it was a difficult process for me because I had made connections with all these women, and there were only, at that point, there were really only a small number that were in that category of rape and retaliation. And so it took me a while emotionally to get on board with what he was suggesting that I do. And so I finally did. And when I did that, I literally had to tear apart the book that I had already begun because it was going to take a whole different focus. And so I took the stories of abuse out, and all the other stories, including my own, went into another book that will be the second book, which I'm really looking forward to finishing someday soon. And that one's called Women Under Fire, PTSD and Healing. But what I had to do then was start really studying and researching this issue of military sexual assault. And so I did. I read everything there is to read about the issue so I could really understand it. And I discovered that our military actually has a culture of abuse toward women. It's been going on for decades. And it actually undermines readiness, it undermines morale, and it has the power to destroy women's health and their careers, and in many cases, their lives. And if anybody's following the news, they know that sexual harassment, assault, and rape have escalated in recent years, and now we know that there are 26,000 a year. There's 71 per day, and if you can imagine it, every 20 minutes, one of our brave service members are being sexually assaulted. And from my perspective, rape by soldiers, commanders, doctors, and gang rape of our women in uniform must be stopped.
Well, now there was a Senate bill sponsored by Senator Gillibrand, and that was recently defeated in the Senate. Tell us about that bill and how that might change if you believe that bill might change the current problem as you see it.
Okay, well, there are lots of problems that I'd really like to share about, and that's going to the legislation which I refer to as the Military Justice Improvement Act, and that's actually what Senator Gillibrand called it. And what that would do, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but what that does is that takes the decision-making of whether or not to prosecute a crime, any crime that's punishable by 1 year or more in confinement, then those cases would be given to independent, trained, professional military prosecutors, with the exception of crimes that are uniquely military in nature.
Don't we already have a JAG Corps and trained prosecutors and a CID, and isn't there already a criminal justice system in place in the military that's adequate to take care of this problem?
The system is absolutely broken.
In what way is that?
Absolutely broken from every avenue. If you start with CID, Criminal Investigation Division, they have a very poor. They have had. I don't know about today because a lot of the information I have, because I've been doing this book for 7 years, is a couple years old now. But I actually talked to a woman who was in the CID, and she told me very directly that they are trained. If the issue is a sexual assault that's been reported by a woman, then they have a particular attitude and way that they go about doing the investigation. And they don't do it very well. They don't follow the book, and they don't really care about having a just outcome. They only care about protecting the image of the Corps, and that's what their goal is, to protect the image of the Corps that they're in and protect whoever the male soldiers are. And that, to me, is not justice. But that's the first step. That's the investigatory step. Then if you go to the next step, when there's a decision made whether or not to go ahead and prosecute, the commander has that authority to do that. And so the commander also is more interested in his own career and the image of the Corps, and so he's going to make decisions based on those facts and not the facts of the case.
I'm here with Sarah Blum. This is George Yates. Our show is Justice for All. We're on 1650 AM. Sarah, your book is Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. It's a well-written book. It's available for sale, those of you. And also, Sarah has a website. What's your website, Sarah?
It's womenunderfire.net.
So if you want more additional information, go to womenunderfire.net or pick up a copy of her book, Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. Sarah, would you briefly give us maybe one or two of the best examples in your book of the culture of abuse which you are describing in the military today?
Yeah. So over in their stories, the women have told me that if they report sexual assault, or if someone else reports it on their behalf, which also has happened, that the perpetrators are protected, promoted, and they're permitted to continue their abusive behavior, language, and behavior unimpeded. Victims, on the other hand, are isolated, they're ostracized, and they're publicly humiliated. 62% of the women who report sexual assault are retaliated against severely. So let me give you some examples. Colleen Mussolino, she was an Army cook in the 1960s. She was gang raped by 4 soldiers who took her literally kicking and screaming into the woods. There are 4 of them, one of her, and she was kicking and screaming so fiercely that they had to put their knees on her arms to keep her, this one woman, from getting them away from her. And so they did that. They gang raped her. They beat her unconscious, and then they left her in the woods. When she regained her consciousness, she had to figure out where she was, and she was bruised on her head, her neck, her jaws, her arms. She was bleeding down her thighs. She was able to orient herself and get herself to the road, where she was ultimately picked up by some military police who took her to the hospital. She was treated there. She was treated well. And then criminal investigation took over, and they interrogated her from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., 5 days a week for 6 weeks. Then, at the end of that, they threatened her with dishonorable discharge if she did not sign their paper, which said she would not prosecute the perpetrators. So that's the kind of situation that we're talking about, how the system is so broken.
Do you have something more recent that's back in the 60s? Is it ongoing today? Do you have something from an example, let's say more recently in the last several years?
Yeah. Ellen Hayes was an exemplary medic in Iraq. She received the Army Commendation Medal and some other awards, and she was repeatedly and forcibly raped and sodomized by a physical therapy assistant who told her, "I will tell them you are an adulteress having an affair with me and that you came on to me, and you will go to jail." Now, he was very confident in that because he's in that system where they protect the rapist. And I didn't tell you, but 95% of these rapes and sexual assaults are perpetrated by repeat offenders and serial rapists. So in this situation, she reported the rapes. She was kicked out of the military when a psychologist who never examined her or treated her gave her a diagnosis of personality disorder. That diagnosis led not only to her being kicked out when she intended to have a full career in the Army, but it also eliminated any opportunity for her to receive follow-up care through the VA or benefits.
What do you say to the people that want to keep the system as it is? I mean, the military is, many people believe that it's an efficient, it's a machine for fighting wars, and that it does its job in that way. There might be there's a culture of people that will say, well, boys will be boys, and I know that's. What do you say to the people that say that the military, as it currently is okay, and it just needs to keep moving in that same direction?
Well, what I say to them is I would like to see the military uphold the values that they espouse of honor and courage and integrity.
I mean, it's basically a failure of leadership, isn't it, in your opinion?
It is a failure of leadership. The leaders in the military, and this is documented, that they're more interested in their own career than the well-being of their troops. And that's wrong. That's very wrong. And if you're in the military, you want a leader who cares about you, who's looking out for you, and who is not in competition with you because he's more interested in his own career and the image of the Corps than truth or integrity or loyalty or following the true values that the military espouses. I actually have been calling for the military to stand up tall and proud and be a model for our country for following through on those values, and instead of having rape and sexual assault be the norm, instead turn it around. So what is the norm is a mutual respectful relationships among the people in the military.
We're here talking with Sarah Blum. She's a Vietnam decorated nurse. She is the author of a book, Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. We're live here at Justice for All. Your host here is George Yates on K-Talk 1650 AM. Sarah, there's one thing that I think you addressed in your book briefly. I don't believe you actually interviewed any men who were the victims of sexual abuse, but my understanding is that there's also sexual abuse of men. There's rape of men in the military that may well have been going on for some time, too. It's got to be even more difficult for these men to come forward and report this sort of thing when it occurs. What has your research shown you on that kind of abuse?
Okay, well, I actually did not research men specifically because I had an overwhelming task as it was, because I'm still working. So I've been doing this on my own time in between. But I do know that it's true that men are being assaulted and raped, and I've met a number of them because I've been traveling around. I've been to Washington, D.C. I went to the summit that was held on truth and justice, and that's where I met a lot of the men directly who'd been sexually assaulted, and I have a great deal of respect and compassion for them. We have actually a mutually respectful relationship, and it is much harder for them because they're men, because it's so much more humiliating, embarrassing to be a man, even a strong man, a big man, and to say that you were sexually assaulted. But that to me, that really highlights the problem in the military with the criminal element and the 95% who are repeat offenders and serial rapists, because they are very slick. They are like sociopathic, and they look good, sound good, make good soldiers on the outside if you're just looking at them from the outside. But they know how to identify their targets, and they know how to find them in vulnerable positions and be able to take them down in an instant. And, because there's a lot of gang rape that happens, and so a lot of these with the men are gang rape, and so they take them down in an instant. They're just totally taken off guard. They have no way to stop what's happening to them. And once it's happened, they are so humiliated, so ashamed. They're not going to tell anybody what happened to them. But, a lot of them will go get some help through the doctor or even through a counselor sometimes. Not that they tell them what happened, but they talk about, they're not able to sleep, they can't concentrate, whatever all the symptoms are that they have. And so there actually is a documentary movie that was made that I think people could see and really get the picture. The one that focuses on the women is called The Invisible War Movie, and it's available in a lot of different ways online. It's a documentary. It's well done. It's a very dramatic film, and you get data. And then there's another one that was made for the men called Justice Denied, and I believe that you can also search for and find that one.
Very briefly before the break, are there... rape is also a very easy crime to charge. As a criminal defense lawyer, sometimes women may or even might delay for a long period of time, and we've only just got a couple of minutes before the break, so perhaps we can address this after the break. But, in my experience defending cases, so often, and I understand what you're saying, women they say that they're afraid to come forward or whatever, and they don't report. This happens in the civilian world as well. And so when somebody does not make the report right away, of course, there's not an opportunity to get forensic evidence and so on. And, I in my opinion, as a criminal defense lawyer, I believe that the person that's being accused of rape sometimes is being denied due process a little bit if somebody makes a complaint and doesn't make it in a timely manner. Whatever evidence might have been there is now gone. And for whatever reason, they don't come forward. So I'd like to address that, because I think sometimes the women that don't come forward right away, and I understand what you're saying, that there's a culture that penalizes people for coming forward, but we run into the same.
To report their rape either to the rapist or to officers that have protected the rapist.
Correct. So
that's why they don't do it.
So let's talk about that after the break. Is one reason perhaps why these reports are delayed, if so, and what we can do about that, because it seems to me that if a rapist is going to be successfully prosecuted, then that report should be made in a timely manner and investigated properly. So after the break, we're going to be talking with Sarah Blum again, Sarah, and about this crisis of sexual assault in the military. And it's a very timely subject here on Memorial Day, because we want to honor our veterans for service, and we want to protect those veterans who of all kinds in our military, women and men. We'll be right back after a break.
Stay tuned for the next segment of Justice for All with George Yates.
Join us every Sunday at noon as the dogs take over the airways on K-Talk 1650 AM. National Canine Academy Radio, the area's only weekly hour-long show that is all about the dogs, with experts from all over the world offering advice on everything from selecting the right dog for you, training, veterinary care, dog food, and even working with your dog. National Canine Academy Radio, only on K-Talk 1650 AM.
Have you been injured in a car accident or other circumstance? Are you in pain, facing a mountain of hospital bills? Is an insurance company trying to get you to settle without an attorney? Call the law firm of George Yates, an experienced personal injury lawyer that can give you the advice you need to make the best decisions. Pick up the phone right now and call 757-491-8800. That's 757-491-8800. Call 757-491-8800 now for a free consultation.
Mark your calendar for May 29th to June 1st as Saints Constantine and Helen Greek Orthodox Church in Newport News presents the Newport News Greek Festival. Enjoy authentic Greek food, desserts, beverages, Greek dancing, entertainment, arts and crafts, vendors, and much more. The Newport News Greek Festival is located on 60 Traverse Road, off exit 258B on Route 17 in Newport News. For more information, log on to newportnewsgreekfestival.org. See you at the Newport News Greek Festival, May 29th to June 1st. Opa!
Spring is back, and so are the Norfolk Tides. Catch the fun and excitement as your Norfolk Tides take the field at beautiful Harbor Park. Bring your friends and family to root on the Orioles of tomorrow today. Log on to norfolktides.com for more information on season tickets, groups, ticket discounts, and Tides merchandise. And don't forget to follow the Tides on Twitter and Facebook for up-to-date promotions and team information. Tides Baseball, minor leagues, major fun.
We doubt ourselves, we doubt our beliefs, we doubt our institutions, and we doubt the law. But today you are the law. You are the law. Not some book, not the lawyers, not a marble statue, or the trappings of the court. You are the law.
We're back here on K-Talk 1650 AM. The name of our show is Justice for All, and I'm your host, George Yates. We're here with Sarah Blum, a decorated nurse from Vietnam, and her book is Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. Before the break, we were talking about what there's particular problems in the military, the way the chain of command does control how cases are prosecuted all the way up to the top. I think Sarah is about to discuss that, as opposed to perhaps in the civilian world, there's a different way that a rape is going to be investigated. In the civilian world, of course, if someone is raped or believes that they need to prosecute somebody for a sexual assault, then they can call the police, and it's investigated independently by the police department. A detective will go out and do their investigation, and she'll go to a nurse at a local hospital or whatever to be examined. And in the military, it's a bit different procedure. Isn't that right, Sarah?
Yes, it is different because everything is within the chain of command, and so they're pretty much in charge of everything. And a lot of what I wrote in my book is that how it could be done differently, so that when a woman does report, that she would go into a private office or treatment room, and she would have a forensic nurse in there who is well trained how to collect forensic evidence. She would be treated with compassion and respect as they would do the investigation. They would ask her questions. They would take pictures. They would collect the forensic evidence. And if a woman knew that she was going to be going into a safe, confidential, private situation and be well treated, she would be much more likely to report it in a timely way. But the other thing to understand about what happens is when a woman is sexually assaulted in the way that so many of these women were that I talked to, they're in a state of shock when that happens, and they are incapable of thinking clearly and of knowing what to do. And oftentimes the first thing that they do is they go into the shower, and they take a shower oftentimes for hours. I mean, there have been women who've actually showered for days on end after a rape. And, of course, by the time they get through with that, then a lot of the forensic evidence is gone. And so that's why I describe in my book the culture of abuse that includes every aspect of what happens to them, because it's a cultural change that we need. It's an attitudinal change that we need, and it has to be based on compassion and respect. But to go back to your question about what happens is so that they need to go in for a forensic examination, and right now it's very, very tenuous because so many of those that are doing the initial exam, they are not compassionate, they are not respectful, they do not provide privacy. For a lot of the women, the rapist was in the very next room or in the hallway. Sometimes doors are left open for them. And so everything is compounded, immediately compounded. And women talk, and they talk to one another, and so they learn and they find out that that's how it is. So why would they've already been severely traumatized, why would they put them through even more trauma? And so that's only the first piece. That's the first piece where they go in and they have the exam and they have the rape kit. And so a lot of times they lose the rape kit. Even though the woman did it, and she did it in a timely way, the military loses it because they really don't want these cases to come to prosecution. Then you're dealing with CID, Criminal Investigation Division. I already talked to you about that. And there are lots of things that are written. You could research them and find them about CID and how they treat, whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Marines, it doesn't matter, how they treat women that have the audacity in their perspective, that women that have the audacity to report that a member of the military actually raped them or sexually assaulted them. Because the attitude of men in the military, now this is not all men, but these are the men that I'm specifically focusing on who are doing these dastardly deeds. These men have the attitude that women are government property for them to do with as they please. And they actually are arrogant toward them, demeaning, diminishing, disrespectful toward them. And so that's why there is no justice for them. But that's how they treat them. That's what the attitude is, and it's very pervasive, which is why I wanted to write this book and write about the culture of abuse toward women, because that pervasive attitude has to change.
Well, if the Department of Defense Secretary Hagel just made this speech yesterday to the Naval Academy graduates, and it is now, of course, front and center in the military. We've got some very prominent cases in the last several months. Not everybody was, of course, pleased with some of the results. The prosecution of General Sinclair being one, where he was facing felony charges and ultimately had them just reduced down to misdemeanors and no jail time. And so there's some cases that people have pointed to that are not real pleased with some of the results. But if Chuck Hagel is front and center on this issue, what's to say that the military can't clean up their act, so to speak, and change the way things are going without major legislation?
As long as a woman has to report her rape to the rapist or to someone who's covering up for the rapist, she is at risk, and we will not have the women coming forward. That's the bottom line. And so the Military Justice Improvement Act takes the reporting of these cases out of the chain of command. It takes the investigations and the prosecution of them out of the hands of the chain of command in independent prosecutors, and so that will totally change the way that things are done and the attitudes of people.
The military has resisted this change. What has been the argument and the main criticism of this proposed change?
Well, their argument is that they will lose their authority and control over the troops, which is absolutely untrue. They will not. And this has been done already in England and in the United Kingdom, in Israel, in Australia. It's been done quite a long number of years ago, and they are not having the kind of problems that the U.S. military is afraid of. And if you know the history of our military, every single time that an issue has come up that they've been asked to change, whether it goes back to segregation and integration, whether it goes back to don't ask, don't tell, and I'm right now not remembering all of them, but in every single case, the military has fought it and has come up with arguments. Always these arguments from the military are about maintaining their authority and control over everything in the military. And it would actually benefit our military if they would stop fighting what they know they need to do. If they would stop the arguments and they would stop the fighting and they would stand up tall and strong and admit that the military justice system in the military, especially in relationship to these cases, is broken. They really need to take a look at the UCMJ in relationship to these cases and make adjustments. They also need to stop hiding behind the Ferries Doctrine, F-E-R-E-S. That was a Supreme Court case in 1954. And basically it says that whatever the situation is that a soldier brings up, where there needs to be accountability on the part of the military hides behind that doctrine, which says that if it was incident to military service, the military is not responsible. They don't have to be accountable. And so what I'm saying is, I think the military is stronger and better than they're showing themselves to be, and they could instead be fully accountable and model that. And if the military would model that and do that, then I think the civilian population may take notice. And because this is a problem, this culture that I'm describing is also a problem on our college campuses today. And so if the military would take the lead, to me, that's the best way for them to go. Rather than having it imposed on them by Congress, they could actually do it willingly. They have never, in all of the years, taken on one of these issues willingly. They've always had to do it under order by the Commander-in-Chief or Congress.
Well, now, the Ferries Doctrine basically says that when you sign on with the military, then that's it. They own you, and they can do whatever they want to do with you, and you can't sue them. Basically, that's the Ferries Doctrine, that no matter what the military does, no matter whether it's wrong or right, you've signed on, and that's it. Is that fair to say? That's what the Ferries Doctrine is?
Exactly.
And that's still the law.
Somehow,
we had a guest
somebody like you or some other people that are brilliant legal minds really need to take that one on and do something that will allow for accountability and justice rather than the way it's been, so that if the military, for example, kills a soldier inadvertently because they were negligent, they should have to be accountable for that.
We had a guest. We had a guest last week, and it wrote a book, Black Mondays: The Worst Decisions of the Supreme Court, and he asked me, guess who the most discriminated people in American history have been from the United States Supreme Court, and it was totally surprised me when he said veterans. And here we are, Memorial Day, talking about veterans,
right.
And we're in the midst of a scandal here with the VA and the delays that were given to veterans, who've given their lives and their bodies for our country, and now getting delays in their medical care as well. So anytime we're starting to talk about the way we have perhaps failed in our promises to our veterans, it's a big story, and of course that's front and center in the news every day now, is the scandal in the VA. I have a couple of, as I've researched this topic for my interview with you today, Sarah, I noted that during the debate, the Senate debate over this bill, which was narrowly defeated, I think there was 55 Senate votes for the Gillibrand bill that would have taken the reporting of these sexual assault incidents out of the chain of command and go do it somewhat in the way you've been talking about, and have independent prosecutors make these decisions as opposed to commanders who might be in the chain of command and have a conflict of interest. But I noticed that, Carl Levin, for instance, a Michigan Democrat who was, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was actually against this bill, and yet Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, two Republicans, libertarians, are in favor of it. So this was an interesting kind of breakout of the way this bill was narrowly defeated. I guess there was a filibuster of it, right, in the Senate where they needed 66 votes, I guess, a 2/3 vote to get this bill through the Senate. I think 55 senators voted for it. What in the world was the argument then? And I don't think Obama has been, President Obama was not supportive of the bill, I don't believe either, right? So what is the argument of these Democrats, prominent Democrats, that are in opposition to this bill, while you've got many Republicans that are opposed to it and Democrats? So how is this shaking out politically, this issue that we're discussing today?
55 votes is what they did have, and you're right, there was quite an unusual mix of senators that were in favor of this. And all they needed were 60 votes because the Republicans had filibustered. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, in the politics of this, is that it depends on who the legislator is and where their constituency is, and where their money comes from. And if they don't want to offend anybody in the military or people who are veterans or organizations that give them money for their campaigns, then they tend to vote for the military from their perspective, which isn't necessarily, from my perspective, is not for the military. Because if you're really for the military, you want this to get cleaned up. You want this to stop. It is a stain and a blot on the name and the image of the military to have this continuing. And it is worse than ever, worse than it's ever been. In 1997, there was a major named Elspeth Ritchie. She was the assistant chief of outpatient psychiatry at Walter Reed. And she testified, this is 97, when they had the Aberdeen Proving Ground scandal, which was the Army scandal, the Army training scandal, a lot like the Lackland Air Force Base scandal that we've just had in 2011. And so she testified against a drill sergeant. And she said that the hierarchical structure of the military was such that any woman reporting sexual assault would find her superiors closing ranks and supporting one another instead of her. That was 97. Here we are, 17 years later. That situation is worse than ever. And so it even is happening in our politics, right? So in the politics, it's all about the money. And just like in the military, the commanders are looking out for themselves and their own careers and the image of the Corps. In Congress, whether it's a senator or representative, they're looking out for themselves, their own career, and making sure that they have enough money for their own campaigns to keep doing what they're doing. They probably could care less about what happens to the individual soldiers that make up our military.
We're live on 1650 AM K-Talk Radio. I'm George Yates. The name of our show is Justice for All. And we're here with Sarah Blum, who is a very dedicated nurse from Vietnam era, who is right in line with our show. We're trying to find justice for all, and she's been dedicating her life to finding justice for the victims of sexual abuse in the military and also those suffering from mental disorders, most particularly PTSD. Sarah, you're also you're a psychotherapist, I see. Tell me about how that has helped you do your research and how I guess you bonded with some of these people that you've interviewed. Tell us a little bit about the writing of this book and how that affected you personally and spiritually.
Sure. So I was an operating room nurse in Vietnam during the war in 1967. Came back in 1968, and I noticed that a lot of the guys' physical wounds were not healing the way we expected them to, and they also were pretty conflicted inside them. They had just a lot going on emotionally inside them. And so at that time, I had no real background or training in psychotherapy, but I could tell, I just intuitively could tell that the problems with them, even their bodies not healing well, were from what was going on inside them. And so I was fortunate that I worked with a doctor in Vietnam who was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was stationed at Madigan, so he was actually there before I got there. And so we had a really good working relationship. I was the head nurse of the ward that he was the officer of. And so I talked with him about this, and he said, well, look, my office in the clinic is just down, it was about 100 yards down the ramp. He said, why don't you use my office and just work with the guys? And so I started doing that. I just started counseling them intuitively, and they started to get better. I mean, a lot of these guys, believe it or not, had problems with impotence. There was no physical reason for them to have that problem, but it was all about what was happening in their hearts and minds. And so I started to work with them about their wounds, the war, whatever was troubling them, their girlfriend, their feelings about themselves, were they still a full-fledged man, all of these things. And I started working with them on that. And because I was the head nurse, I had actually a lot of power and authority myself as head nurse. And so I could give them a weekend pass if I wanted to, for them to be able to go out and, have a date or whatever it was. And with a lot of the guys that were going to be stuck there, like they had the kind of wounds, broken bones and things that they were going to be there for months healing, I could actually give them a private room and bring their wives in. So I had a lot of latitude in that way. And so I used that and to help them, and it was working. And so I could come in on Monday morning, and the guys that had the passes, I could tell the minute I saw their faces if they had success on the weekend, if they felt better about themselves. They never had to say a word. I could just tell. And so that was kind of the beginning for me of leaning in the direction of psychotherapy. And then I did actually go back to school. I got to work with the veterans at the Veterans Hospital, PTSD, in the early days when we really didn't know as much as we know now about PTSD. And so I was working with them then. They were getting better, and so I discovered that I had this gift, and I pursued it, went to school, got all my degrees and lots of postgraduate work, and I started, in 1975, I was in graduate school when Saigon fell, and, you would think that it wouldn't have a huge impact on somebody, but it did. When Saigon fell, so much that was inside me started coming out, and I was in the middle of graduate school, and so I had a very hard time, and I was basically told by the director of the program in graduate school, get your shit together or get out. Well, I had my shit together before that, but now I had to work harder, so I actually had to kind of shore up all the protections I had in place around all my emotions so that I could finish graduate school, and did. And then ultimately, when the Iranian hostages came back in 1981, that's when I sort of came unzipped and had to go into therapy and do my own work. And in doing my own work, I realized how powerful that work was and how that was what I really wanted to do, and I wanted to help my brother and sister veterans. And so I dedicated my life. As soon as I had gotten the help that I needed and I was doing better, then I dedicated my life to helping my brother and sister veterans with theirs, and have basically focused on trauma resolution for 29 years. And then
I had
that skill, that's why when I was sort of invited to take on this task of interviewing women veterans and getting their stories, I could actually do that with them over the phone and tune into them while I was doing the interview. So I was like right there with them. I could have been in the same room with them. It felt so, I was so present with them that I could have been right in the same room with them, and I could hold them energetically while they told me their story, and then if they got triggered during the story, which some of them did, then I could just stop doing the interview, work with them until they felt better, and then find out if they could go on or if we needed to reschedule to finish it another day. So those skills actually helped me in all the times that I did all of these interviews.
This book is Women Under Fire, Sexual Abuse in the Military. Our guest today is Sarah Blum, and she's a psychotherapist and decorated nurse from Vietnam. Sarah, this PTSD, as you said earlier, it's one of those things that we didn't really know about years and years ago. I think they used to call it, what did they call it back in the old, shell shock, I think,
shell
right?
shock,
Back in the old
combat
days.
fatigue, it's had many names.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we have a name for it, PTSD, and it's very real. And you know a lot about it. And I think your next book is actually going to focus on PTSD. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And your website is womenunderfire.com.
Womenunderfire.net.
.net, okay. Womenunderfire.net.
And there's a lot of information there, and there's stories on there that didn't get it into the book because they didn't fit the subject matter. And then the other stories of women I interviewed are in the next book, the second book, and I'll be doing more interviews for that book when once I get through working with all of this.
We only have just a few more minutes in the show, and of course, I want to thank you for being our guest today. It's been very interesting, and I got to tell you that when I first started researching this topic, I was not didn't really have a decision on it one way or the other. I was one of those status quo people. Maybe the military is doing a decent job of it, but you kind of convinced me over time that perhaps there does need to be a change made because of this issue, especially it's the conflict of interest that seems to me. You've got a commander trying to make the decision as to how to investigate a case, and he knows both the victim and the perpetrator. It seems to me that that's the problem. If you've got a police officer, let's say, trying to investigate a criminal case in the civilian world, and he knows both the victim and the perpetrator of the case, he's probably going to take himself out of that and give it to a detective that doesn't know these people. So you're asking too much, perhaps. We understand that our officers and our senior petty officers are they're gentlemen. They're supposed to be trained. They're supposed to be ethical and moral. But you're probably asking too much of them to judge and make an independent decision on whether or not they should prosecute a case going forward when they know both the victim and the perpetrator. And that inherent conflict of interest is part of the problem, the main problem, as you've been describing it today. Am I right?
Exactly. Yes. And so, they should not really be in that position.
And so currently we have this situation
these
where
cases are complicated and messy, and they why not let them do the job they do best, which is to do their military job and give this kind of a case over to someone that's an independent prosecutor.
Correct. And that is exactly what you've been asking. And we've got about one more minute. What is the chance of this bill coming back? I know you have a lot of solutions in your book, and I'm just telling everyone out there, if you're interested about this subject, read Sarah's book. It's a great book, and it does document this case very well. And she has that website, the Women Under, what is it again? I'm sorry.
Womenunderfire.net.
Womenunderfire.net. Is this Senate bill going to be coming back up? Are there going to be changes made, or is it going to be enough for the military to say, we've got it under control?
My belief is that there's going to be another big scandal somewhere, and it's going to blow up again, and then the military is going to cave, and the Congress is going to rise up and probably vote in favor of this bill. But basically, there's some key things that they need to do. The military needs to hold offenders accountable because they're not doing that. They need to punish criminal behavior. They need to get rid of the criminal element that's in there now, and then take reporting out of the chain of command. Those four things are going to go a long way to ending this culture of abuse toward women in the military.
Well, it's a very one of those topics that, as we try to show here on Justice for All, we try to pick topics that are in the news and that have legal significance, and also highlight the problems with many of our institutions in society today. So our guest today has been Sarah Blum. Thank you very much for being with us today, Sarah.
You're welcome, George. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, great. We hope to have you on again, maybe when you write your new book.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Have a great day. We're about to sign off here. This has been Justice for All with George Yates, and you have a great Memorial Day weekend, everyone out there, and we'll see you next week at 2 o'clock on 1650 AM.
Your source for great talk radio and news.
It was
in
a horrific
Virginia
scene when a gunman went on a shooting spree
near
near the UC Santa Barbara campus last night.